everyone, how are you doing today? Well, I know that YouTube videos are kind of immortal and timeless in the sense that you can watch them anywhere, at any time, now or in the future, but nevertheless, I hope you're enjoying whatever season it is that you happen to be in right now. And for those of you celebrating Advent, I hope you're having a wonderful Advent season. In this video, I'm going to be doing kind of a retrospective, going over the books that I read in 2022 and looking at my Goodreads challenge and kind of trying to figure out what went wrong. I'll go over the things that went well too, but I feel like it was not the best year for reading, in part due to poor planning. I knew that I was going to be really busy this spring, and I didn't really plan for that exactly in terms of my reading. So I set a pretty high goal for myself this year to read 25 books. And unfortunately, I only finished 16, and some of those were short stories and poems. Not that that's a problem. I'm going to get into that a little bit later as far as like the Goodreads challenge and my thoughts on it. But yeah, it just wasn't a very good year for reading, and part of that was me. Part of it might have just been some bad luck. I mean, I don't know about you, but some years just aren't the best for reading. And along with that, I had kind of a epiphany moment earlier this year, which led me to reevaluate why I've been reading and how I've been reading over my life. And I think I'm going to make 2 or 3 videos that kind of cover that, not to make it all about me, but really to explain kind of my history with reading. And I think it may help some people because I've learned some things this year that honestly I wasn't really aware of before, and I think would have helped me a great deal if I'd known them a little sooner. So expect some kind of introspective videos like that on the horizon. But for now, let's go over my Goodreads reading, and I'm just going to show some highlights in no thematic order. This is going to be more chronological. First one here is To Build a Fire by Jack London. This was a short story that I read with a friend, and honestly, we were both looking forward to it with the greatest of expectations, no pun intended. I have enjoyed writings by Jack London. I enjoyed The Cruise of the Snark, which is his memoir of traveling around the world in his yacht. I enjoyed The Sea Wolf, a really good sea story. I think I might have covered that one in my video on sea stories. And so this story called To Build a Fire is supposed to be kind of a survival horror story, and really I didn't care for it. It was a bit predictable and the buildup was quite slow. Nonetheless, some people find it very thrilling, so don't let my negative review of this, or really of any book, deter you from giving it a try. It just wasn't my cup of tea, pun intended. The next one up was Crime and Punishment. Now you'll remember that I did a whole video on Crime and Punishment and kind of went in depth on Dostoevsky's inspiration for the book and kind of my thoughts of the characters and the themes and the ending. Really, it was probably one of the more disappointing Dostoevsky books I've read so far. Nonetheless, I'm glad I read it. It's one of those classics, and I'll get into this a bit more later, but it's really one of those classics that, honestly, a classic that you feel like you should read. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I did read it, and I give it 3 stars. But again, it was not my favorite classic, nor my favorite Dostoevsky. However, for those of you who may not want to sit through the entire review, I would say, as a summary, I enjoyed the themes. I enjoyed Raskolnikov and his plight and the philosophy in the book. What I didn't really enjoy was how very iterative the novel felt. In some ways that was impressive because it gives it a very modern feel. It doesn't really feel like a 19th century novel, but due to the repetition throughout the book, and then the very sudden ending that seemed to just sort of turn everything on its head. I really couldn't rate it that highly, but I think, it's certainly worth trying. A lot of people absolutely love that novel. The next one on the list here is Dubliners, which I actually do have a copy of. I read it on the wonderful Project Gutenberg, but I ended up getting a paperback of it. This is a very nice cover design, in my opinion. This is put out by Modern Library. I've always liked their editions for the most part, with a few quibbles here and there, but read this with Blage. We're doing Reading the World, and this was the country, or the book for the country of Ireland. I did a video on this, so you can watch that if you like, but in summary, I thought it was an excellent collection of short stories, an excellent introduction to Joyce for those of us who are more intimidated by him and by his like tackling his really big novels. This is a great way to kind of get into his headspace and really sink your teeth into some very well-written short stories that are full of psychological elements and just, all of the cultural things that maybe you'll have to learn a bit more about on your own. But really liked Dubliners. This was a highlight of the year. Highly recommend it. Some of the stories, I felt that The Dead was overrated. That's perhaps the most famous story from this collection, but by and large, I'm really glad I read this, and I lent it to my mom, and she really liked it too. So, great book, a good giftable book as well, for that matter. Okay, so the next one here, moving to some very different book. This is Feng Shui Modern by Cliff Tan. I've been following Cliff's YouTube channel called Dear Modern, and he has kind of represented Feng Shui for a modern audience. And what this really is a combination of traditional Chinese, I guess it's a combination of interior design. I mean, it even extends to where you build your house, that kind of thing. So what I like about his take on this, and, I've heard of this before, but what I like about his take on it is that he really zooms in on the psychology aspect. I mean, he still teaches you the traditional aspects to it. Some of them are what we would consider to be superstitious elements to it. But nonetheless, his focus is really about the psychology of it, and he explains why these different things make sense. And what I also like about him and his approach is that he gives you all these guidelines for arranging your furniture and stuff, but he's like, you know what? At the end of the day, it's also what feels good to you, because you're the one in the space, and, it's really not just about following rules. It's about making your space feel very comfortable, very livable, and aesthetically and emotionally pleasing. So, I really recommend his channel, Dear Modern. It's he's got quite a lighthearted sense of humor, very different style perhaps than my videos, but highly recommend checking it out if you're interested in interior design, or you want to kind of dip your toes into Feng Shui. So the next book I read was something I picked up at the library, hence its absence today. It's called Eye Level, Poems by Jenny Xie. And really, I was just kind of browsing the poetry aisle at my local library. I've decided to start going to the library again, more regularly. And I did a whole blog post on that, so do check it out, classicsconsidered.com. I've got to plug the blog now and then. But yeah, this was a collection of poems. And I was really interested in reading poetry by a Chinese American poet. I would say that these poems, on the plus side, they weren't super shocking or salacious like a lot of poems are written today, but they were also kind of not, they didn't really draw me in emotionally, so I was a little bit disappointed with this collection. If you like kind of travel poetry, you might want to check it out. Another book that I read this year, which was for our Reading the World Challenge, is called The Last Gift by Abdulrazak Gurnah. And he was a Nobel Prize winner from Zanzibar, I believe. And it was kind of a family drama. Again, I don't have it here, but I'll show a picture of the cover. It was a family drama about an elderly man with a dark secret, and also about the immigrant experience in Great Britain when this book was published. I want to say, I think this takes place in like the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s, but it was published in 2011, it says here. So, you know, I don't know, it just wasn't a very impressive novel from my perspective, but maybe I picked the wrong one of his books to start with. I was looking for something a little more, like a little bit more surprising and insightful, I suppose, and really the book was a little more on the predictable side of things. I think it did kind of trigger some thoughts as far as how to approach an older relative that might have like trauma or things that they find difficult to talk about. So like that part of it I could kind of relate to. But as far as the novel, as a novel, it just wasn't a highlight of the year. So I have yet to read a novel by Haruki Murakami, but I did read the short story called Drive My Car. I believe this was featured in a free lesson by a Japanese teacher that I would highly recommend if you're looking to get into Japanese literature. Every so often someone will say that they want to get into Japanese literature, but they don't really know where to start. So I'm going to plug his classes in the description of this video, and I would highly recommend checking them out. I haven't had time, sadly, to participate recently. Like this year just hasn't been good, but in past years I've absolutely enjoyed his classes, and they're absolutely worth the money. You get to read the story, you get to hear the history about it, and there's always good discussion with the participants there. So definitely check that out if you're looking for just a really easy and insightful introduction to Japanese literature. Alright, so a little interlude here. Read a short story called Shoddy Lands by C.S. Lewis. It was, I think my review was something like, it's a shoddy short story. It's a very weird short story from Mr. Lewis about a giant naked woman, and that's all I'm going to say. Okay, I know it's about more than that, but I really did not like this book or this story, so, read it and let me know what you think. The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, did a video on that. A lot of people really, I think that some of the people that saw my review had better experiences with this than I did, so, again, your mileage may vary, and just because I didn't like it doesn't mean you won't find something good in it. The next book that we have is Free Will by Mark Balaguer, and I did a book review of this as well on the blog. This one and the next two books kind of all go together. I was kind of on this theological, philosophical kick this summer, and I read this book, which is not religiously oriented, although he does talk about religious views on free will a little bit. His main argument in this book is you cannot disprove the existence of free will, and that was kind of a nice nuanced take. I do believe in free will for the record, but I was just kind of curious to get like a secular perspective on that. And then I read, kind of in the same zone, Why God Makes Sense in a World That Doesn't. I think I've shown this book a lot of times, but I cannot wait to review this. I just need to read it again because it was full of fantastic information, and I'm not usually a fan of these kinds of books, or, reading about this sort of thing, mostly because I think it can stray very quickly into a very, well, not the most charitable writing or argumentation. And I really like Ortland's approach because if it's anything, it's charitable and kind and loving as it should be. So really liked this book. If you've read all the apologetics books out there, this is certainly worth a try, even if you aren't really a fan of the genre. And honestly, I don't know that I've ever read one through, like as an adult, maybe as a child. But again, this is the kind of book for those people that might want to stray away from this topic in general. And I also liked his other book for Christians, Finding the Right Hills to Die On, The Case for Theological Triage. So these were definitely all 3 highlights of the year, which kind of tells you the state of nonfiction for 2022. And the novels just did not fare quite as well. So a while ago, I did an unboxing of the New King James Version journal Bibles. And I think I read 1 or 2 this year. I'm pretty sure I read, my list on Goodreads says I read Galatians. I'm pretty sure I read Ephesians as well. But I'm currently rereading Hebrews because it's one of my favorite books of the Bible. And I am still very pleased with these. And legitimately, taking notes. I don't really feel super comfortable annotating Bibles, but this kind of gives you that space. And I haven't really I just have a few faint pencils notes here, but still great format if you're looking for something like this. I still recommend it as someone who's now reading it. Let's see, a book I don't have here is called Living Tissue 10 by 10. And this is by this author is from Moldova. And I don't want to mispronounce his name, but I read about half of this book and it was very difficult for me to get through. I think there was a lot of good stuff in it. It's certainly an interesting look at the author's experiences growing up in a Soviet culture and how that affected his family life and his father especially. And, there's some really good stuff there. But it's also quite, graphic in terms of sexual matters. And I really wasn't able to get past that because it was kind of throughout the book. I could probably skip a scene here or there, but it's kind of hard to wade through that throughout the whole book. And I just wasn't enjoying it. So your mileage may vary. What I will say is it was very creatively written so that you could read a chapter here, a chapter there, and kind of get a whole different sequence of events, which makes for a really cool way to write a memoir. So, definitely pros and cons with that book. I didn't end up finishing it, but it was interesting in different ways. All right, so let's talk about a couple of books. Actually, before I do that, Child Roll to the Dark Tower came. I don't have a physical collection of Browning's work here, but I revisited the famous poem by Robert Browning, which also inspired the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, which I haven't read yet, but perhaps now I will, because upon rereading it, I really felt deeply moved by this poem. I could really understand this time what Browning was doing in the poem and why it's so great. The first time I read it, I was kind of turned off by some of it, and then upon a second reading, I could really pull out the complexity of the poem, and not just the language, because the language is a little difficult, but the themes and the different ways you can interpret the ending was really fun and very moving. And I think I might do a video, sort of a line by line. Maybe I'll read the poem through and then we'll go through it line by line and kind of explain what's going on or what could be going on depending on your interpretation. Anyway, if you're interested in that, let me know. So let's talk about a couple of other pieces of fiction here that I did not finish. So this is Lucian, The Real Story of Ah and Other Tales of China, the complete fiction. Honestly, got about halfway through this. This was also for Reading the World, and it was good. I didn't not finish it because I disliked it, but once you get about halfway, you kind of get the idea here. And, Lucian, I would like to do, I'm planning to do a video comparing different authors that are roughly contemporaries. So that would be this guy. I think Joyce would be another one to compare this with. And it was extremely interesting, very educational. I do recommend the introduction to this Penguin edition because it kind of illuminates the stories. It does, I feel like, spoil Diary of a Madman, so you might want to read that first and then the introduction, but by and large, really liked the introduction. The stories are very sad. Often they center around this man who's going back to his hometown or remembering his hometown and, people that lived there and things that they suffered. And then there's kind of like this political backdrop where he's kind of, it's not quite Kafka level, but he's like kind of hinting at the fact that there are these, struggles going on. And even if there's like a revolution or something, it doesn't mean things are going to really change. And the introduction kind of alludes to that as well. He was always kind of an individualistic type, even though he really, ended up siding with the leftists. But like, as the introduction suggests, he would have always been kind of like a critic. Like he was just geared that way, or he saw things that needed to be corrected and he was going to say it in his writing. So a complex figure and still very relevant for today in the situation we find ourselves in. And one thing that I really liked about reading about him, and this is kind of like the the elevator version of my book reviews. So if you're looking for more details, I'll refer you to the blog once again. But he only ever wrote short stories. So these are literally all his fiction in here. And I just think that's very inspiring. Like, I really like the short story format, and I can totally see myself being an author like that just writes short form. So that was really cool. Definitely worth checking out, both for Chinese literature and just literature in general. All right, so here's the one that everyone has been waiting for, right? Middlemarch by George Eliot. And you can see how far I persevered and then stopped persevering. This is another book like Crime and Punishment that I really felt I should read, and I really liked the TV series, so I kind of assumed that, like, I'd really get into it. And the first part was truly thrilling. It's called Miss Brooke. And I was watching a vlog by Joseph, and I think he mentioned that Middlemarch was really originally like 2 or 3 books, concepts that got combined into this sweeping narrative about this provincial town, a small provincial town. And oh, that's one of the problems I had with it. When Dickens has a bunch of different threads, he manages to braid them together pretty nicely, and you never really get bored. Or, like, you might have favorite characters. Like, obviously in Martin Chuzzlewit there's some tedious characters, but typically Dickens keeps you moving along, keeps you interested. Even when he does, like, some of those switches, I mean, it still keeps moving. It still keeps you on your toes. Didn't feel like I was on my toes with Middlemarch. I felt like I was being dragged along. One of the things, I'll just go ahead and say it, one of the things I want to do better at in the new year is feel okay not finishing something and not like beating myself up for it. And I think I got farther than I needed to in here just because it was for a book club, and I thought, well, surely I'll finish it if it's for a book club. But, it's all right to set it aside, and I'm really glad that I did. And I'm not sure if I will finish it. That's to be determined. What I might do instead is move on to Daniel Deronda, which has been on my list a very long time as well. And perhaps that one will click better. And, this is the kind of book I can just pick up again probably if I so choose. But, yeah, sad tale of Middlemarch. And then, last but not least, we had a little real estate problem, The Unheralded Story of Native Americans in Comedy by Cliff Nesteroff. This is another one that I reviewed on my blog. Not a classic, but certainly, I would say, groundbreaking kind of writing here in terms of the subject matter. So Cliff Nesteroff is a researcher of comedy, the history of comedy. He has a book that's just about comedy in general, which I think would be quite interesting. This book focuses on Native Americans, and the title is taken from a historic television appearance by this comedian named Charlie Hill. And that was like one of the big, if not the first big moment when a person from an indigenous tribe appeared on television as a stand-up comedian. Honestly, this book kind of takes you through Native Americans and like the original stage shows, and it takes you through early Hollywood and then kind of through early television, heyday of television, and now the modern day where it's still television, still like, I mean, that's still a factor, but then you've also got like YouTube and stuff. So to kind of summarize my book review on this one, it started out really strong. I could hardly put it down for like the first third or so. And then the second 2/3 or the last 2/3 was very repetitive, and it just kind of seemed to be stuck in this pattern of talking about this comedian and how they got started and who their inspiration was, and it became very formulaic. The first third of the book had a nice like framing, especially in terms of the overarching history that these people experienced and the things they suffered. But yeah, it just got more and more formulaic as it went on, and it was too bad because I think it's a worthy subject to read about. It just doesn't keep up the interest that long. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. So, yeah. I would say it's a kind of thing that if you're looking for something of this, like a historical book to pick up, it's kind of written in a journalistic style. I compared it to a Ken Burns documentary, but he does use a lot of interviews and primary sources, so I think it's, I do like that factor about it. So we've got kind of the very scanty books here that I've read this year. What I wanted to kind of wrap up with here was talking about how I will read differently in 2023. A lot of my revelations this year had to do with kind of understanding my reading history up to this point, how I read as a child, a teenager, early adulthood, and so on. And I will be doing a video all about that, again, more to help people perhaps unpack their own reading journeys, not just to talk about myself the whole time. But kind of to summarize that a little bit, what I want to do more in 2023 is read with more ease and not get so wrapped up in how much I'm reading or how fast or slow I'm reading. So part of it's just going to be this conscious effort to just relax a little more when I'm reading and enjoy the process, and yet not be so invested in the process that I'm not reading for the real reason of reading, which is to grasp the message or the story. We'll talk about that more in the future, but that's kind of a preview of that video. I'm going to be okay with not finishing books as much, and perhaps be more intentional about it if it's, if I've given it a really good try and it's just not clicking with me at the time. And then I'm going to use the library a lot more. I did a post about this recently, but I really have enjoyed going to the library again. I like the process of picking up a book and, having it for a time and then bringing it back in person. I've been using the library's ebook systems extensively for several years now. In fact, I showed this one in hard copy, but I actually read this on an ebook and got the hard copy from someone later. So yeah, I'm excited about using the library more again and just supporting it in that way as well. I think the more you use something, the more likely it is to stick around, and it's been a great blessing to me throughout my entire life. So I do want it to continue. It's one of the, as I put it, it's one of the few institutions that really still seems to be going strong. So let's hope it stays that way. But other than that, I will be doing a lot of the same things next year. I will continue to be participating in various book clubs and read-alongs, and also just, there's a few topics I'm really interested about reading currently. So I might make some videos about that, but for now I will leave those to be announced. And then I just want to finish this up with asking you, if you're still here, what were your best and worst reads of 2022? And let me know. Maybe your top 3, bottom 3, or something like that. And thanks so much for watching this little bit longer video than usual. But I hope it was interesting in some way, and I hope it encourages you to, keep reading, whatever that looks like for you right now. Sometimes we have hard times, hard years. I feel like this was one of those years for me, but you should feel good about what you did read and what you did learn. Maybe you're learning something outside of books. Maybe you're listening more to podcasts and talks and things, and that's awesome. Like, don't beat yourself up over it. Just keep it steady as she goes, and you'll soon get back on track. So thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.